I raised my son alone for 23 years. I worked double shifts at the hospital, skipped meals so he could have seconds, wore the same winter coat for a decade while he got new sneakers every season. I taught him to say please and thank you, to hold doors for strangers, to call his grandmother every Sunday. I thought I had raised a good man. I was wrong. The moment he told me to shut it at the dinner table in front of his wife's entire family, everything I believed about my life shattered like cheap glass hitting concrete. But I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I simply stood up, picked up my purse, and walked out of that house. What my son didn't know was that I had already made a decision 3 days earlier, a decision that would change both our lives forever. He thought he was dismissing an annoying old woman. He had no idea he was severing a lifeline he didn't even know he was drowning without. My name is Catherine, and this is the story of how my son learned the hardest lesson of his life. If you haven't already subscribed to this channel, please hit that subscribe button now. And to get the conversation going, please leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from. Thank you so much. Now, let's get back to the story. The morning of that Christmas dinner started like any other holiday in the 5 years since my son married into the Wellington family. I woke at 5 in the morning in my small one-bedroom apartment on the south side of town, the side where the streetlights flicker and the grocery store closes at 6 because of theft. I showered in water that never quite got hot enough, dressed in my nicest outfit, a burgundy blouse I'd found at the thrift store, and black slacks I'd owned since before my son graduated high school, and carefully wrapped the gifts I'd spent 3 months saving for. For my son, a leather wallet I'd seen him admire in a shop window back in September. For my daughter-in-law, a silk scarf in the deep emerald green she favored. For my grandson, my only grandchild, a wooden train set I'd found at an estate sale, and lovingly restored, sanding each piece smooth, painting the engine a cheerful red, polishing the wheels until they spun freely. I'd spent 40 hours on that train set, working by lamplight after my shifts at the hospital, breathing in sawdust and paint fumes in my tiny kitchen, imagining my grandson's face when he saw it. I wrapped each gift with discount paper I'd bought the day after the previous Christmas, saved the ribbons from last year, tied careful bows. I attached cards with handwritten messages, pouring my heart onto those small rectangles of cardstock, because that's all I had to give that cost nothing. Words of love, words of pride, words that, as it turned out, meant absolutely nothing. The drive to the Wellington house took 45 minutes. I didn't mind. I'd saved for 2 months to afford the gas, but seeing my family was worth it. Worth every extra shift I'd picked up, every meal I'd stretched, every luxury I'd denied myself. That's what you do when you love someone. You sacrifice, you give, you pour yourself out like water, trusting that the vessel you're filling will hold what you've given and return it when you're empty yourself. I was very, very empty. I just didn't know it yet. The Wellington house stood in the kind of neighborhood where every lawn looked like a golf course, and every driveway held cars worth more than I made in a year. 3 stories of pale brick and white columns, windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, a door painted glossy black with a wreath that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. I parked my 15-year-old sedan on the street 3 houses down because I knew they didn't like the look of it in their circular driveway. My son had never said it explicitly, but I understood. I always understood what wasn't being said. I walked to the door carrying my carefully wrapped gifts and a homemade pie, apple with a lattice crust, made from scratch because store-bought felt impersonal, and I wanted to contribute something, anything, to the elaborate meal I knew would be served. My daughter-in-law's mother always hired caterers for Christmas dinner. They'd have prime rib and roasted vegetables and some kind of fancy potato dish with a French name. My apple pie, made in my ancient oven that heated unevenly, would sit at the end of the dessert table next to professionally made tarts and cakes from the bakery downtown. But I made it anyway, because I'm his mother, because it's what I do. My daughter-in-law answered the door. She looked stunning, as always. Cream-colored cashmere dress that probably cost more than my rent, pearls at her throat, hair styled in loose waves that looked effortless, but I knew took an hour and a professional to achieve. She smiled when she saw me, the kind of smile that engaged her mouth, but never quite reached her eyes. "Catherine, Merry Christmas. Come in, come in. Oh, you brought pie. How sweet. You know you didn't have to do that." Her voice had that particular tone, the one that translated to you really shouldn't have done that, but I pretended not to notice. I'd become very good at pretending not to notice things. "Merry Christmas, dear. I know I didn't have to, but I wanted to. Is everyone here already?" "Most everyone. My parents are in the living room. My brother and his wife just arrived. And your son is in the study with my father. They're discussing the business merger." She took the pie from my hands with the tips of her fingers, as if touching it too firmly might contaminate her. "I'll just put this in the kitchen with the other desserts." I stepped into the foyer with its marble floors and crystal chandelier, feeling immediately out of place in my thrift store blouse and old slacks. I could see into the living room where my daughter-in-law's family gathered around a fireplace that probably cost more than my car, holding crystal glasses filled with wine that I knew cost $60 a bottle because I'd seen the receipt once, forgotten on the counter during a previous visit. They looked like something out of a magazine. Perfect hair, perfect clothes, perfect teeth, perfect lives. They spoke in the particular cadence of people who'd never worried about money, never counted pennies, never chosen between medicine and groceries. They laughed at jokes about vacation homes and stock portfolios and which private school was better for children, and I stood in the doorway feeling invisible. My son emerged from the study, and for a moment, for just one fleeting second, I saw the boy I'd raised, the one who'd hugged me tight after his first day of kindergarten and told me I was the best mom in the world, the one who'd made me breakfast in bed on Mother's Day with burnt toast and overcooked eggs and so much love, the one who'd promised me at his high school graduation that he'd take care of me someday, that he'd never forget everything I'd done for him. Then the moment passed, and I saw instead the man he'd become. Expensive suit, expensive watch, expensive haircut. He looked like his father-in-law, like he'd been absorbed into this world of wealth and comfort and had forgotten entirely where he came from. Forgotten the apartment with the leaking ceiling. Forgotten the nights I'd sat up with him when he was sick because I couldn't afford a doctor. Forgotten the summer I'd worked 3 jobs so he could go to science camp. Forgotten or chosen not to remember. "Mom, Merry Christmas." He kissed my cheek, quick and perfunctory the way you'd greet a distant relative you felt obligated to acknowledge. "You made it. Traffic okay?" "Fine, honey. Merry Christmas. I brought gifts." I held up the carefully wrapped packages, feeling suddenly foolish with my discount paper and recycled bows. "Great, just put them under the tree. Dinner's at 4. We're having cocktails in the living room if you want to join us." He glanced at his watch, one of those complicated ones with multiple dials that serve no purpose except to signal wealth. "Actually, could you help in the kitchen? The caterers have been asking about plate arrangements, and my mother-in-law is busy with guests. Help in the kitchen. Not join us for cocktails. Not come meet my father-in-law's business partner. Not sit with the family. Help in the kitchen like I was the hired help, not the woman who'd given birth to him, raised him alone, sacrificed everything so he could have the education and opportunities that led him to this life." I forced a smile. "Of course, honey, happy to help." I spent the next 2 hours in that enormous kitchen with its marble countertops and professional-grade appliances that the family probably never even used, arranging plates and folding napkins and feeling the weight of my invisibility pressing down on my shoulders like wet concrete. The caterers, efficient women in black pants and white shirts, spoke to me politely, but clearly assumed I was someone's housekeeper, or perhaps a poor relation taken in out of charity. I didn't correct them. What did it matter what strangers thought? Through the doorway, I could hear laughter from the living room, my son's voice animated and confident, telling some story that made everyone chuckle. I wondered if he ever told stories about me, about the woman who'd raised him alone after his father left when he was 3, about the mother who'd worked herself to exhaustion so he could have a future. Probably not. Those stories didn't fit the narrative of his new life, the successful young businessman who'd married into old money and left his humble beginnings far behind. At 4 o'clock, we gathered around the dining room table. It could easily seat 20, gleaming dark wood that reflected the light from another crystal chandelier. The table was set like something from a magazine, china plates with gold trim, multiple forks and spoons, whose purposes I only vaguely understood, crystal wine glasses that caught the light and threw tiny rainbows across the white tablecloth. Flowers in the center, some exotic arrangement that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Candles in silver holders, their flames dancing. I was seated at the end of the table, far from my son, who sat next to his wife near her parents at the head. My grandson, barely 2 years old, sat in a high chair next to his mother, banging a spoon against the tray and squealing with delight. I wanted to go to him, to kiss his soft cheek, to tell him his grandmother loved him. But I stayed in my seat at the distant end of the table, understanding without being told that I was there on sufferance, that I should be grateful to be included at all. The meal was elaborate and excessive. Course after course emerged from the kitchen, each more ornate than the last. I ate small portions, aware that I was probably using the wrong fork, probably committing some breach of etiquette that everyone was too polite to mention, but that they'd discuss later after I left. I spoke when spoken to, complimented the food, laughed at the appropriate moments during the conversation that flowed around me like water around a stone. I was drowning in that beautiful house, suffocating under the weight of my own irrelevance, and nobody noticed because nobody was looking. Midway through the main course, my daughter-in-law's father launched into a story about their recent vacation to some island I'd never heard of, a place where they'd stayed in a villa that cost more per night than I made in a month. Everyone listened attentively, asking questions about the beach and the food and the service. It was the kind of conversation that required no response from me, so I remained silent, cutting my prime rib into small pieces and trying to remember when I'd last eaten meat this expensive. Probably never. Then my daughter-in-law's mother turned to me with that same smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Catherine, dear, you've been so quiet. How have you been? Still working at the hospital?" All eyes turned to me. I felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing, pressing down on my chest. "Yes, still at the hospital. I'm doing well, thank you. And how are you?" "Oh, wonderfully. We've been so busy with the holidays. I'm chairing the benefit gala again this year. It's exhausting, but so rewarding." She sipped her wine, diamonds glittering on her wrist as she raised the glass. "I don't know how you do it working at your age. Don't you ever think about retiring?" At my age, I was 58 years old, not ancient. But the way she said it made me feel like I was one step from the grave. "I can't afford to retire. The hospital has good benefits, and I need the health insurance." The table fell silent. It was as if I'd said something obscene, mentioned some biological function inappropriate for dinner conversation. They didn't talk about needing things at this table. Need was for other people, people like me, people who existed in some other realm where money wasn't an infinite resource. My son cleared his throat. "Mom, I've told you before, if you need help with expenses, you should just ask." I looked at him across the length of that long table, my son who I'd raised alone, who I'd given everything to, who now sat in his expensive suit next to his wealthy wife, and talked about giving me money like I was a charity case, a beggar he might toss some coins to if I humbled myself enough to ask. "I don't need help. I support myself. I always have." My voice came out harder than I intended. I saw my daughter-in-law's eyes widen slightly, saw her mother's smile freeze in place. "There's no shame in accepting help, Catherine." My daughter-in-law's father spoke in the hearty, condescending tone of a man who'd never needed help in his life. "We're family. That's what family does." Family. These people who saw me 3 or 4 times a year, who'd never visited my small apartment, who knew nothing about my life except that I worked at a hospital and drove an old car and wore thrift store clothes. They were my family now. But the son I'd raised, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for, the man who'd promised to take care of me, he sat silent, nodding along with his father-in-law's empty platitudes. "I appreciate that," I said carefully, measuring each word, "but I'm doing fine. I've always taken care of myself." "Well, you certainly raised a wonderful son." My daughter-in-law's mother gestured toward my son with her wine glass. "He's been such an asset to the family business. We're so grateful you gave us such a brilliant addition to the family." Gave them. Like I'd handed him over, a gift I'd carefully cultivated for their benefit. Like the 23 years I'd spent raising him alone were just preparation for him to join their family. serve their purposes, further their business interests. I felt something cold and hard forming in my chest, a stone of realization settling into place. I had lost my son, not to death or distance, but to this, to wealth and comfort, and a world where people like me were invisible unless we were useful. He wasn't mine anymore. Maybe he hadn't been mine for years, and I'd just been too desperate, too hopeful, too pathetically grateful for whatever scraps of attention he threw my way to notice. I'm very proud of him, I said quietly. I always have been. My son smiled, acknowledging the compliment with a small nod, but his attention was already drifting back to his father-in-law, back to the conversation about business mergers and profit margins and expansion plans. I might as well have been speaking from another planet. I pushed food around my plate, no longer hungry, waiting for the meal to end so I could give my gifts and leave. I was calculating in my head how much gas I had left, whether I could make it home without stopping at a station. Money was tight until my next paycheck, and I'd spent more than I should have on the gifts under the tree. But that was fine. I'd make it work. I always made it work. Dessert arrived, 7 different options spread across the table, professional confections that belonged in a bakery window. My apple pie sat at the far end, looking homely and out of place. My daughter-in-law's mother made a show of cutting small slices of each dessert, sampling them with delicate bites and elaborate compliments to the caterers. She didn't touch my pie. Neither did anyone else. It sat there untouched, unwanted, exactly like me. After dessert, we moved to the living room for the gift exchange. This had become my least favorite part of every holiday. The Wellingtons exchanged extravagant gifts, things that cost hundreds or thousands of dollars, presented in elaborate wrapping with enormous bows. They gave each other jewelry and electronics and gift certificates to expensive restaurants and spa days. They gave each other weekends away and designer handbags and bottles of wine that cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. And then there were my gifts, my carefully wrapped packages with their discount paper and recycled bows containing things I'd saved months to afford, things that probably seemed laughably cheap to people who spent more on a single dinner out than I spent on Christmas gifts for my entire family. I watched as my son opened the leather wallet. He held it up, examining it with the same polite interest he might show a child's drawing. Thanks, Mom. This is nice. He set it aside immediately, reaching for the next gift, something from his father-in-law in a box from an expensive men's store. My daughter-in-law opened her scarf with the same detached courtesy. Oh, how lovely, thank you, Catherine. It disappeared into the pile of gifts surrounding her, buried under cashmere and silk and designer labels. Then my grandson opened the train set. I'd been waiting for this moment, hoping for this moment. He was so young, not yet corrupted by this world of excess and entitlement. Surely he would appreciate the hours I'd spent, the love I'd poured into restoring that simple wooden toy. He looked at it for approximately 3 seconds before dropping it and reaching for another package. This one containing some elaborate electronic toy that probably cost $500 and would bore him in a week. The train set lay forgotten on the floor. My son's wife picked it up, examined it briefly. How quaint. Is this vintage? She said it like vintage was a polite word for garbage. I restored it myself, I said quietly. I thought he might like something simple, something to use his imagination with. That's very thoughtful. She set it aside with the same dismissive gesture her husband had used with the wallet. We just have so many toys already. I'm not sure where we'd put another one. Not sure where they'd put it. In their 3-story house, with its dozens of rooms. They weren't sure where they'd put a simple wooden train set. The message was clear. My gifts weren't wanted. I wasn't wanted. I was tolerated out of obligation, included out of duty, endured because it would be too awkward to cut me out entirely. The stone in my chest grew heavier. The gift exchange continued. I received a generic gift card to a department store, the kind of impersonal present you give someone you don't know well and don't care to know better. I thanked them with genuine gratitude because $25 was $25 and I could use it for necessities. They probably spent more on coffee in a week. As the afternoon wore into evening, the conversation flowed around me. They talked about their plans for the new year, vacations they were planning, renovations they were considering for their already perfect home. They talked about private schools for my grandson, about trust funds and investment portfolios. They talked about everything except anything that might include me, anything that might acknowledge I existed beyond this room, beyond this role, as the poor relation who showed up for obligatory holidays and then disappeared back to whatever sad little life she inhabited. I sat in a chair by the window, holding my generic gift card, watching my son laugh with his father in law, watching my grandson play with expensive toys he'd forget in a month, watching my daughter in law sip wine and check her phone, and I felt more alone than I had in my entire life. More alone than when my husband left, more alone than when I'd sat in hospital waiting rooms with a sick child and no insurance. More alone than all the nights I'd worked double shifts and come home to an empty apartment, because at least then I'd had hope. Hope that I was building something, creating something, raising a son who would grow into a man who valued what I'd given him, who would remember where he came from, who would love me the way I loved him. That hope had been a lie. Around 7 in the evening, I gathered my purse and my gift card and stood to leave. My son walked me to the door, a courtesy extended to departing guests. "Thanks for coming, Mom. Drive safe." "I will. Thank you for having me." The words were automatic, meaningless. He hesitated, one hand on the doorknob. "Look, about what you said at dinner, about not needing help. You know, if you ever really need anything, you just have to ask. If I ever really need anything. Like food or shelter or basic human dignity. Like love or attention or acknowledgement that I was more than an inconvenient obligation." I thought about all the times I'd needed things over the past 5 years. Needed company on my birthday, which he'd forgotten 3 years running. Needed help when I'd been sick with pneumonia and couldn't work for 2 weeks. Needed someone to talk to when I'd found a lump in my breast and spent 3 terrified weeks waiting for biopsy results. Needed my son to be my son, not a stranger in an expensive suit who parceled out polite tolerance like it was generosity. I'd needed a lot of things I'd never asked because I could see what he'd become, and I knew that asking would only bring me more pain. "I know," I said softly. "Thank you." I turned to leave, but before I could step through the door, my daughter-in-law's voice called from the living room. "Oh, Catherine, before you go, we're planning a dinner party next month for my father's birthday. Would you be able to help serve? The caterers charge extra for additional staff, and since you have experience working in service, we thought you might be willing." The words hit me like a physical blow. Experience working in service. She meant my job at the hospital, my career of 30 years caring for patients, helping people through the worst moments of their lives, skilled work that required training and compassion and strength. She'd reduced it to service, made it equivalent to serving canapes at a dinner party for people who saw me as free labor. I waited for my son to say something, to object, to defend me, to tell his wife that his mother wasn't their servant, that asking me to work their dinner party was insulting and cruel. He said nothing. He stood there in his expensive suit with his hand on his expensive doorknob in his expensive house, and he said absolutely nothing. "I'll have to check my schedule," I said, my voice remarkably steady considering my hands were shaking. "I work a lot of evenings." "Well, let us know. It would really help us out." My daughter-in-law's voice floated from the other room, casual and unconcerned. She'd already dismissed me from her thoughts, moved on to the next item on her mental checklist. I looked at my son one last time, saw nothing in his face but mild discomfort, the expression of someone caught in an awkward social situation they hoped would resolve itself without requiring any effort on their part. "Goodbye," I said. I walked to my car, started the engine, and drove away from that perfect house in that perfect neighborhood. I didn't cry. I was beyond crying. I felt hollowed out, scraped empty, like something essential had been cut out of my chest, leaving only a void. I drove home through streets that grew progressively shabbier, watched the houses shrink and the cars age and the storefronts become more barred and desperate. I parked in front of my small apartment building, climbed the stairs to my door, let myself into my one-bedroom home with its secondhand furniture and its view of the parking lot. I set my purse on the counter, placed the generic gift card next to it, looked around my small, shabby, honest space, and then I called my lawyer. I'd made the call 3 days before Christmas, right after my son had canceled our lunch date for the fourth time in 2 months. Something had broken in me that day, some final thread of hope or delusion. I'd sat in the restaurant where we were supposed to meet, waited 45 minutes before checking my phone and finding his text. Something came up at work. Rain check? He hadn't even bothered to call. I'd gone home that day and pulled out the folder I kept in my desk drawer. The folder containing my will, my advance directives, my life insurance policy, documents I'd created years ago, back when my son was still someone I recognized, back when I'd still believed he'd be there for me when I needed him. I'd looked at my will, at the clause that left everything to my son. It wasn't much. My small life insurance policy, about $75,000. My retirement account, another $60,000. My car, my furniture, my few pieces of jewelry, maybe $150,000 total when everything was added up and liquidated. Not wealthy by Wellington standards. Around an error in their world. But it was everything I had. My entire life, reduced to numbers on paper. And I'd planned to give it all to a son who couldn't be bothered to show up for lunch, who saw me 3 or 4 times a year out of obligation, who let his wife treat me like hired help. I'd called a lawyer that afternoon, made an appointment for after the holidays, and now, standing in my small apartment on Christmas night, I knew I'd made the right decision. The appointment was scheduled for the day after the New Year. I spent the week between Christmas and New Year's in a strange state of calm determination. I went to work, cared for my patients, came home to my quiet apartment. I didn't call my son, he didn't call me. It was like Christmas had never happened, like I'd imagined the whole thing, except I hadn't, and I was done imagining. The lawyer's office was in a modest building downtown, nothing like the gleaming towers where my son worked. The lawyer herself was a woman about my age, professional but warm, with kind eyes behind practical glasses. "So, you want to change your will?" she said, reviewing the documents I'd brought. "Currently, everything goes to your son, and you want to change that." "Yes." "May I ask why?" "I need to ensure you're of sound mind and acting of your own free will. Family will disputes can get complicated if there's any question of undue influence or diminished capacity." "I'm of perfectly sound mind," I said firmly. "My son has made it very clear that he doesn't need me or want me in his life beyond obligatory holiday appearances. He's married into a wealthy family. He has everything he could possibly want. I'm changing my will because I want my assets to go to people who will actually benefit from them." The lawyer nodded slowly. "I understand. Do you have other children? Other family members you'd like to designate as beneficiaries?" "No, no other children. No family to speak of. But I have something else in mind." I explained my plan. The lawyer listened without interrupting, taking notes, occasionally nodding. When I finished, she sat back in her chair. "That's actually quite beautiful," she said softly. "Are you sure? Once we execute these documents, if you want to change them again, it's certainly possible, but I want to make sure this is really what you want." I've never been more sure of anything in my life. We spent the next 2 hours going through paperwork, signing documents, establishing the legal framework for what I wanted to do with my legacy. It wasn't much, my small legacy, but it was mine, and I had spent my whole life giving it away to someone who didn't value it. Now I would give it to people who might. When I left the lawyer's office, I felt lighter than I had in years, like I'd set down a burden I'd been carrying so long, I'd forgotten it was there. I went back to my life, work and home, and the quiet routines of single existence. I didn't reach out to my son. I waited to see how long it would take him to notice. 3 weeks. It took him 3 weeks to call me. "Hey, Mom, sorry I haven't been in touch. Work's been crazy. How are you?" "I'm fine. How are you?" "Good, good. Listen, I was wondering if you could do us a favor. My mother-in-law needs someone to watch my son next Saturday. Their usual nanny is out of town. I know it's last minute, but would you be available? Not would you like to see your grandson? Not we'd love for you to spend time with him. Would you be available to provide free childcare because they didn't want to pay someone? What time? I asked, my voice neutral. We need to drop him off around 9 in the morning. We'll pick him up around 7. There's a charity gala we have to attend. 10 hours. They wanted me to provide 10 hours of free childcare so they could go to a party. I'll have to check my schedule. Mom, come on, I know you're not working next Saturday. Can't you just say yes? How did he know I wasn't working? Had he called the hospital? Or did he just assume that my time was his, that I had nothing better to do than wait around for him to need something? I might have plans, I said calmly. Plans? What plans? His tone suggested the idea of me having plans was absurd. Personal plans, I'll let you know. This is ridiculous. It's just one day. It's your grandson. Don't you want to spend time with him? There it was. The guilt trip, the manipulation, the suggestion that I was the one being unreasonable, that I was failing in my duty as a grandmother because I wouldn't immediately agree to 10 hours of free labor on his schedule. If you want me to spend time with my grandson, you can bring him to visit me anytime. You know where I live, even if you've never actually visited. But I'm not available to provide free childcare every time your nanny is unavailable. I have my own life. Silence on the other end of the line. I could practically feel his shock. His mother had never said no before. His mother had always been available, always accommodating, always grateful for whatever scraps of attention he threw her way. Fine. His voice had gone cold. I'll find someone else. You do that? He hung up without saying goodbye. I set the phone down and waited for the guilt to arrive, for the doubt, for the voice in my head that would tell me I was being selfish, that I should have said yes, that grandmothers are supposed to jump at any chance to see their grandchildren, even if it meant being used. The guilt never came. I felt nothing but a strange relief. 2 days later, my daughter-in-law called. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was brief and pointed. Catherine, I don't know what's going on with you lately, but your son told me about your conversation regarding babysitting. I have to say, I'm very disappointed. We've always been so good to you, included you in our family, and this is how you repay us? By refusing to help when we need you? I think you need to reconsider your priorities. Family helps family. That's what being a grandmother means. I deleted the message without a second thought. Family helps family. How interesting that this principle only seemed to apply in one direction. I was supposed to help them whenever they asked, grateful for the opportunity to be useful. But when I'd needed help, when I'd been alone and struggling and desperate for connection, where had they been? I knew where. They'd been in their perfect house living their perfect life, and I'd been invisible. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was just absent. March arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of false spring that makes you believe winter is over before one last snowstorm proves you wrong. I was working the evening shift at the hospital when I got a call from my lawyer. I wanted to touch base with you about your estate documents. Everything is filed and legally binding. I also wanted to remind you that you haven't updated your emergency contact information. It still lists your son. Emergency contact, the person they'd call if something happened to me, if I had an accident or a heart attack or any of the 100 things that could happen to a woman my age working long shifts on her feet. I'd like to change that, I said. Can I list you? Me? The lawyer sounded surprised. Unless that's inappropriate, I just don't have anyone else. And you've been very kind. It's not inappropriate at all. I'd be honored. But are you sure there's no one else? No friends? No colleagues? I thought about my colleagues at the hospital. Good people, but we weren't close. We worked together, occasionally shared meals in the cafeteria. But outside of work, we lived separate lives. I thought about the neighbors in my apartment building. We nodded in hallways, exchanged pleasantries about the weather, but I didn't even know most of their names. I'd spent so much of my life focused on my son, on being his mother, on the relationship I'd thought we had, that I'd let everything else atrophy. I'd become one of those sad women you hear about who die alone in their apartments and aren't found for days because no one notices they're gone. Except I wasn't going to be that woman, not anymore. There's no one else, I said honestly. But that's all right, I'm going to change that. I started small. I accepted an invitation from a coworker to join a book club. I signed up for a yoga class at the community center. I started eating breakfast at the diner down the street from my apartment, became a regular, learned the waitress's name, and she learned mine. I volunteered at the library on my days off, shelving books and helping patrons and slowly, tentatively, building connections with other volunteers. I was making a life, a real life, not one lived in service to someone who didn't value me, not one spent waiting for phone calls that rarely came and visits that grew increasingly infrequent, a life that belonged to me. My son didn't call for 6 weeks after the babysitting incident. When he finally did, his voice had the studied casualness of someone who knows they've done something wrong but isn't quite ready to admit it. Hey, Mom, how have you been? I've been well, you? Good, good. Listen, I was wondering if you could do us a favor. My mother-in-law mentioned that you haven't returned any of her calls. I hadn't been aware his mother-in-law had called. I checked my phone. 3 missed calls over the past month. No voicemails. I didn't realize she wanted something specific. She didn't leave any messages. She's planning a family event. She wanted to make sure you knew you were invited. What kind of event? A garden party for my father-in-law's retirement. It's in May. Pretty casual, just family and close friends. I'll have to check my schedule. The same response I'd given before. The response that made it clear I had a life that didn't revolve around their convenience. Mom, what is going on with you? You're being really weird lately. Weird how? Just, I don't know, distant, unavailable. It's not like you. It's not like you. Translation, you're not behaving the way I expect you to behave. You're not being accommodating and grateful and endlessly available. You're not playing your assigned role in my life. I've been busy, I said simply. I have my own life. Surely you can understand that. Busy with what? Your job at the hospital? Come on, Mom. You make it sound like you're running a corporation or something. Can't you take one day off for a family event? And there it was, the dismissal. The casual diminishment of my entire career, my 30 years of skilled work, reduced to just a job at the hospital, something unimportant, something easily set aside for their convenience, something cold and hard crystallized in my chest, not anger, exactly, clarity. I work in the intensive care unit, I said quietly. I care for people who are fighting for their lives. I hold their hands when they're scared. I advocate for them when they can't advocate for themselves. I help families navigate the worst days of their lives. It might not be as impressive as business mergers and investment portfolios, but it matters. It matters to the people I help, and it matters to me. Silence on the other end of the line. I didn't mean it like that, he said finally. Yes, you did. You've meant it like that for years. You're just not used to me pointing it out. Mom, I don't want to fight. I don't want to fight either. I just want you to respect me, to value me, to treat me like I'm a person with my own life and not just someone who exists to be useful to you when you need something. More silence, longer this time. Is this about the babysitting thing? Because I'm sorry if you felt pressured. If I felt pressured, not I'm sorry I pressured you. If you felt pressured, making it my perception, my problem, not his behavior. It's about more than that. It's about the last 5 years. It's about you forgetting my birthday 3 times. It's about canceling our lunch dates over and over. It's about watching your wife ask me to serve at dinner parties like I'm hired help. It's about sitting at the end of your table during holidays feeling invisible. It's about raising you alone and sacrificing everything and being treated like an inconvenient obligation you tolerate out of duty. I hadn't meant to say all of that. It poured out like water from a broken pipe, all the hurt and resentment and disappointment I'd been holding back for years. Mom, that's not fair. Isn't it? Tell me one thing you know about my life right now. What books am I reading? What am I doing with my free time? Do you know when I was sick with pneumonia last year? Do you know I had a breast cancer scare? Do you know anything about me beyond the fact that I work at a hospital and drive an old car? Silence, complete silence. You don't, I said softly. You don't know me at all. Because you've never asked. You've never cared enough to ask. I've had a lot going on, building a career, starting a family. So did I. I built a career and started a family as a single mother with no help and no money. And somehow I still managed to show up for you. Every school play, every parent teacher conference, every sports game, every moment that mattered, I was there. Where have you been for me? I heard him exhale a long, slow breath. I don't know what you want from me. I don't want anything from you anymore. That's the point. I spent years wanting things from you, wanting your time, your attention, your love, wanting you to be the son I raised, the man I thought you'd become. But you're not that person. You're someone else, someone I don't recognize, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise. So what? You're just cutting me out of your life. I'm your son. You're my son by biology, but you stopped being my son in any meaningful sense years ago. I just didn't want to admit it. That's a horrible thing to say. It's the truth, and I'm done lying to both of us. He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice had an edge I'd never heard directed at me before. You know what? Fine. If that's how you feel, fine. I've tried to include you in our life. I've tried to make room for you even though you don't really fit. But if you want to be alone, if you want to cut yourself off from your only family, that's your choice. Don't come crying to me when you're old and sick and realize you've got nobody. The cruelty of it took my breath away. The calculated meanness, designed to hurt, designed to make me feel small and scared and desperate. It didn't work. I'll take my chances, I said. Goodbye. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but not with fear or regret. With relief, with liberation. I'd said the things I needed to say. I'd told the truth I'd been avoiding for years, and the sky hadn't fallen. The earth hadn't opened up and swallowed me. I was still standing, still breathing, still me. The days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Spring faded into summer. I went to work, attended my book club, practiced yoga, volunteered at the library. I made friends, tentative at first, but real. I had conversations about things that mattered. I laughed. I cried when I needed to. I lived. My son didn't call. His wife didn't call. I wasn't invited to the garden party. I wasn't invited to my grandson's second birthday. I saw photos on social media, a platform I rarely used, but couldn't quite bring myself to delete. Pictures of my grandson covered in cake, surrounded by people I didn't know, happy, loved, growing up without me. It hurt. I won't pretend it didn't hurt, but it hurt less than pretending had hurt, less than watching my gifts ignored and my presence tolerated and my life dismissed. This pain was clean, honest, the pain of loss rather than the pain of constant rejection. I could live with it. In September, 7 months after our last conversation, I got a letter. Not a call, a letter. Formal, typed, delivered by certified mail. It was from my son's lawyer. My hands trembled as I opened it. The language was dense, legal, full of whereas and therefore and other terms designed to intimidate. But the meaning was clear. My son was formally requesting that I either gift him his inheritance now or provide detailed documentation of my assets to ensure that my estate was being properly managed for his benefit as the sole heir. He was demanding his inheritance while I was still alive, demanding that I prove to him that I hadn't spent or hidden the money he considered already his. I read the letter 3 times. Each time I felt less hurt and more vindicated. This was who he really was. This was what I really meant to him. Not a mother, not a person, just a vessel containing assets he believed belonged to him. I called my lawyer, read her the letter. Can he do this? I asked. He can request anything he wants. That doesn't mean he has any legal right to it. Your assets are yours. You can do whatever you want with them. His inheritance only becomes his when you die, and only if your will designates him as a beneficiary, which it no longer does. Should I tell him? That's entirely up to you. Legally, you have no obligation to inform him of changes to your will, though it might save some trouble later if you do. He could contest the will after your death. Let him contest it. I have documented reasons for my choices. I'm of sound mind. The will is legal. If he wants to waste money fighting it, that's his choice. Then I'd suggest you simply don't respond to his lawyer's letter. Let them wonder. I took her advice. The letter went unanswered. 2 weeks later, another letter arrived, more aggressive in tone, threatening legal action if I didn't comply with their requests. This one I handed directly to my lawyer. I'll send them a response on your behalf, she said, making it clear that they have no legal standing to make these demands and that any further harassment will be met with appropriate legal action. I nodded, felt nothing but a deep, settled calm. My son had finally shown me exactly what I meant to him, a number on a balance sheet, an inheritance he was impatient to claim. The months continued their march. Fall arrived, then winter. The holidays approached with the same dread they'd inspired for years. This time, I didn't wonder if I'd be invited to Christmas dinner. I knew I wouldn't be. The invitation never came. On Christmas Day, I woke up in my small apartment, made myself a good breakfast, and went to work a volunteer shift at the homeless shelter. I served meals to people who had far less than I did, people who thanked me with genuine gratitude, people who saw me, really saw me, not as a means to an end, not as an inconvenient obligation, but as a person who was there, present, offering what I had. It was the best Christmas I'd had in years. 2 weeks later, in early January, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Is this Catherine? A woman's voice, hesitant. Yes. My name is Victoria. I'm your son's mother-in-law. We need to talk. My first instinct was to hang up. I didn't owe these people anything, least of all conversation. But curiosity won out. What about? It's about your son and my daughter and the situation they've created. Could we meet for coffee, please? I know you have no reason to trust me or agree to see me, but I'm asking anyway. Something in her voice made me say yes. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our neighborhoods. She arrived before me, seated at a corner table, looking nervous. Up close, she looked older than she had at the holiday dinners. Tired. Her expensive clothes couldn't hide the exhaustion in her eyes. Thank you for coming, she said as I sat down. I wasn't sure you would. I'm not sure why I did, I answered honestly. She smiled, a small, sad smile. Because you're a better person than the rest of us. She stirred her coffee, not drinking it. I need to tell you some things. Things about your son, things you deserve to know. I already know what kind of person my son has become. Do you? Do you know that after you stopped coming to family events, he told everyone you'd become senile, that you were having memory problems and saying inappropriate things, that he was very concerned about your mental health? The words hit like a slap. He what? He's been telling people you're losing your mind, that you're not capable of managing your own affairs, that he's worried you'll be taken advantage of. He's been building a narrative, Catherine, a narrative that would support a claim that you're mentally incompetent. My blood ran cold. Why would he do that? So he could challenge your will, take control of your assets. My daughter knows about it. She's encouraging him. They're in financial trouble, you see, deep trouble. They live in a mansion. They drive expensive cars. They live in a mansion my husband's company owns. They drive expensive cars leased through his business. And that business is failing, has been failing for 2 years. My husband made bad investments, took on too much debt. We're on the verge of bankruptcy. Your son knows. He's been trying to figure out how to extract himself before it all comes crashing down. What does this have to do with me? Your inheritance, however much it is, they need it. They've been counting on it. And when you stopped answering calls, stopped coming to events, they panicked. Your son hired a lawyer to investigate whether they could have you declared incompetent. Take control of your assets while you're still alive. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the table. I'm telling you this because it's wrong. Victoria's voice shook. I've watched my daughter become someone I don't recognize. I've watched your son transform from a kind young man into someone who treats his own mother like an ATM. And I've stayed silent because they're my family, and you don't betray family, but this is too much. You deserve to know what they're planning. Why tell me now? Why risk your relationship with your daughter? Because I'm dying. She said it simply, matter-of-factly. I have pancreatic cancer, 6 months, maybe less. And when you know you're dying, you realize that some things matter more than keeping the peace. Truth matters. Justice matters. You matter, Catherine. You're a good woman who raised your son alone and worked hard your whole life. You don't deserve this. I didn't know what to say, didn't know if I should believe her, but looking at her face, seeing the sincerity in her eyes, the exhaustion, the resignation, I knew she was telling the truth. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you for telling me. There's more. She reached into her purse, pulled out a folder. Documents, emails between my daughter and your son, text messages, proof of what they're planning. Take them, show them to your lawyer. Protect yourself. I took the folder with trembling hands. I'm sorry, Victoria said. I'm sorry we treated you the way we did. I'm sorry my daughter learned to value money more than people. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. I hope it's not too late. We sat in silence for a moment. Then I reached across the table and took her hand. It's not too late, I said. Thank you for your courage. She squeezed my hand, tears in her eyes. Promise me something. Promise me you'll live. Really live. Don't let them steal another moment of your life. You have time left. Use it. I will. We finished our coffee, exchanged phone numbers. I'd like to think we might have become friends if she'd had more time. But 6 months later, I got a call that she'd passed. I sent flowers to the funeral, but didn't attend. It didn't feel right. Crashing a family event for people who'd made it clear I wasn't family. But I kept my promise to her. I really lived. I took the documents to my lawyer. She reviewed them, her expression growing more serious with each page. This is damning, she said finally. They were absolutely planning to have you declared incompetent. They'd already consulted with 3 different psychiatrists about what would be required. They were building a case. Can they still do it? They can try, but with these documents, we can prove that their motivations are financial, not out of genuine concern for your welfare. We can also file a restraining order preventing them from making any legal moves against you. And I'd recommend we inform the medical board. What they were planning could be considered elder abuse. Elder abuse? The term made me feel old, vulnerable, but it was accurate. Would you like to pursue charges? I thought about it. Thought about my son in a courtroom facing charges of attempted financial abuse. Thought about the satisfaction of seeing him held accountable. Thought about the years of pain and dismissal and being made to feel invisible. No, I said finally. I don't want revenge. I just want to be left alone. Send them a letter. Tell them we have documentation of their plans. Tell them if they make any further attempt to contact me or interfere with my assets, we'll pursue both criminal and civil action. Tell them to stay away from me. Are you sure? They deserve to face consequences. They will, just not from me. I'm done giving them space in my life, even angry space. The letter was sent. I never heard from my son again. No phone calls, no letters, no lawyers, just silence. It was the best gift he ever gave me. 5 years have passed since that last Christmas dinner. 5 years since I walked out of that house and never returned. 5 years since I told my son the truth and set myself free. I'm 63 now, still working at the hospital, though I've cut back to 3 days a week. Still living in my small apartment, though I've repainted and redecorated, made it truly mine. I have friends now, real friends, people who call to check on me, who remember my birthday, who invite me to movies and dinners and book clubs, people who see me. I never remarried, never really wanted to, but I'm not alone, not anymore. My grandson is 7 now. I see pictures sometimes on social media. He looks happy. I hope he is. I hope he never learns what his father did, what his parents were willing to do to a woman who gave everything. I hope he grows up to be better than them. I think about him sometimes. Wonder if he remembers me at all. Wonder if he'll ask about me someday. Wonder what they tell him when he does. But I don't lose sleep over it. I made my peace with that loss. Some people are meant to be in your life, some aren't. Even when you share blood, even when you gave birth to them and raised them and loved them with everything you had. My will remains unchanged. My life insurance and retirement accounts, everything I've saved, will be divided between 3 charities: a scholarship fund for single mothers returning to school, a nurse's assistance program for healthcare workers facing financial hardship, and a hospice that provides end-of-life care for people who can't afford it. My son will get nothing, Not out of spite, not out of revenge, but because he doesn't need it. He made his choices. He chose wealth over love, money over family, greed over basic human decency. He'll survive without my small inheritance, and maybe someday he'll understand what he lost. Or maybe he won't. That's not my concern anymore. 3 months ago, I was at the hospital working my shift when a patient came in. 65 years old, heart attack, barely conscious. I held her hand as we stabilized her, whispered reassurance, made sure she wasn't alone in her fear. She survived. Woke up 3 days later to find me checking her vitals. You, she whispered. You were there when I came in. I was. How are you feeling? Scared, my son. I called him. He hasn't come. My heart clenched. I'm sorry. I don't have anyone else, just him. I gave him everything. Everything. I pulled up a chair, sat beside her bed, took her hand. Then give yourself something, I said gently. Give yourself permission to build a life that doesn't depend on him. You survived this. You have time. Don't waste it waiting for people who aren't coming. She started to cry. Not sad tears, relieved tears. Can I do that? Just stop waiting? You can. I did. We talked for an hour. I told her my story. She told me hers. Different details, same pain. The pain of loving someone who couldn't or wouldn't love you back. The pain of sacrifice unrewarded. The pain of finally letting go. When my shift ended, I gave her my book club's information, told her we met every Tuesday, told her she'd be welcome. She came. She's still coming. She's making friends, building a life. She calls me sometimes, not to talk about her son, but to talk about the book she's reading, or the yoga class she tried, or the volunteer work she started at the animal shelter. She's living, really living. Last week I got a letter, not from my son, from my former mother-in-law's estate attorney. Victoria had left me something in her will, not money, something better. It was a photograph, an old one from before my son married into the family. It showed me and my son at his college graduation. He was young, happy, looking at me with genuine love in his eyes, his arm around my shoulders, my face beaming with pride. On the back, in Victoria's handwriting, she'd written, "This is who he was. This is who he could have been. I'm sorry he chose differently. You deserved better. Thank you for helping me choose differently. Your courage at the end of your story gave me courage at the end of mine." I framed that photograph, put it on my bookshelf between pictures of my friends and my book club and my volunteer work. Not because I want to remember my son as he is, but because I want to remember that once, a long time ago, I raised a boy who loved me. That boy is gone, but he existed, and my love for him wasn't wasted, even if he didn't keep it. I did what I was supposed to do. I loved my child. I gave him everything. I raised him to be a good person. What he chose to become was his decision, his responsibility, not mine. I'm at peace with that now. Sometimes people ask me if I regret it, cutting off my only child, walking away from my only grandchild, leaving my small inheritance to strangers instead of blood family. I tell them no, I don't regret it, because the alternative was continuing to let myself be diminished, dismissed, treated like I didn't matter. The alternative was dying slowly, piece by piece, while pretending everything was fine. The alternative was spending whatever time I have left waiting for phone calls that wouldn't come, and visits that would only happen when they needed something. I chose differently. I chose myself. That's not selfish. That's survival. And I'm still here, still working, still laughing, still living, still mattering to people who actually see me. My son told me to shut it that Christmas night, told me to be quiet, to stop existing in a way that inconvenienced him. Instead, I stood up, I took my bag, I walked away, and I never went back. Did you like the story? Please leave a comment and tell me where you listen from. And if you haven't already subscribed to this channel, please hit that subscribe button now. Thank you so much. See you tomorrow for another emotional tale.